This story took place in January 1996 in an old apartment building in central Boston. Located in a quieter part of town, the building was one of those imposing brick-covered structures built in the early 1900s. Though it had aged, it was still functional, home to a few tenants, all who kept to themselves. Lydia's friend had found the place for her, describing it as affordable and quiet. Lydia had just moved in and was still settling into her new life in the city. She was working odd hours at a nearby restaurant and loved the idea of being able to come home to silence, but that silence didn't last for long. On her second night, just past midnight, she noticed the dim light spilling from underneath the apartment door across the hall. Her landlord, a man named Mr. Barnes, had told her that she was the only tenant on the floor. The vacant apartment across from her had been empty for months, maybe even a year. But here was a clear glow of light, figuring maybe a maintenance worker had stopped by to check on something. Lydia shrugged it off and went to bed. The next morning she brought it up casually to Mr. Barnes when she saw him fixing the lobby door. She mentioned the light, hoping for a quick explanation. "Oh, that apartment, it's empty," he said quickly, almost like he was embarrassed. "No one's been in there for a long time." His answer felt hasty, clipped, as if he was brushing off her question. That night, Lydia lay in bed, listening to the old building creak and sigh. Just after midnight, she started hearing a strange sound coming from the hallway. It wasn't the usual pipes or groaning of the floorboards, but something very specific. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. They started softly, then grew louder, steady and deliberate. They seemed to stop just outside of her door. Frozen in bed, Lydia held her breath, straining to listen. The footsteps resumed, moving back and forth, almost as if someone were pacing outside her apartment. She had the horrifying realization that whoever, or whatever it was, seemed to be walking back and forth in front of both her door and the door to the vacant apartment across the hall. After what felt like hours, the footsteps finally ceased. Lydia lay awake for the rest of the night, her skin prickling with an unsettling feeling she couldn't shake. Over the next week, the footsteps returned every night, always beginning at midnight and pacing for hours. One night she got the courage to open her door a crack. Peering out, she saw that the same dim light seeping from under the door across the hall. It seemed to flicker like an old lamp, but when she got closer, the light abruptly went dark, as if someone had heard her approaching and switched it off. But it was the smell that frightened her the most. A damp, earthy smell seemed to creep under her door each night, thick and heavy like wet soil and something else. Something metallic, faint, but distinct. Finally, after 2 weeks of sleepless nights, Lydia confronted Mr. Barnes, practically begging him to tell her what was going on. He hesitated, running a hand over his jaw as he looked at the floor. "Look, it's probably nothing, but..." He paused. "A man rented that unit a couple of years back, lived there for a week tops before he vanished, just like that. One night he was there, and for the next he was gone. No one saw him leave, and his belongings were still inside." Lydia stared at him, horrified. They brought the police in, and when they went inside, they found something strange written on the wall in his apartment. Just one sentence. Looked like he'd scratched it with his fingernail. "It's still in here with me." She felt a chill go down her spine. The pacing continued every night after that, and the smell only got worse. Objects in her apartment started moving, her shoes, her glasses, even her toothbrush, which one night was damp and when she hadn't used it since the morning. Something was in her space, in her life, and it was getting closer. One night after the dragging sounds began just outside her door, she'd had enough. She grabbed her flashlight, flung her door open, and stormed across the hall, banging on the vacant apartment door. "Who's in there?" she shouted, her voice trembling. What do you want?" There was silence, and then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, a voice replied from the other side of the door. "Please, can you help me find the way out?" Heart pounding, she reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge, as if something or someone was holding it shut from the other side. She backed away slowly, her flashlight flickering, and bolted back to her apartment, locking and deadbolting her door. The next morning she couldn't stand it any longer. She packed her things and left, never looking back, and when she called to let Mr. Barnes know she was moving out, she heard the tremor in his voice as he simply replied, "I understand." The building still stands today, empty now. Neighbours claim they can still see lights flickering on and off in that second floor window, and sometimes hear faint footsteps echoing down the empty halls. No one has lived on that floor since.